It's on our side.
Oh, there we go.
Failed destination, failed on some destination. Okay, that's fine. We will be live on most places. All right, we're up. Hi, everyone. Sorry about the technical delay. Still trying to fix the YouTube. Okay, perfect. We're live on all platforms. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our... One sec. I'm trying to disconnect my voice. Hi, everyone. We are up and running, and welcome to our very exciting webinar called Future of Risk Management Powered by AI. I'm very excited. My name is Alex Sidorenko. I'm very excited to be joined by Alex Kleber and Brian McGough today to talk about some of the just most unbelievable opportunities we have in risk management space coming from AI. And when I've met the guys and we started exchanging ideas and talking about some of the things that I'm trying to automate in the company where I work, and some of the ideas that guys have actually implemented before, and some of the things they're trying. That was so amazing that, okay, we need to bring this together and we need to share it with the broader risk awareness week audience. So I'm glad you are participating in this. And remember, this is live, as you can obviously tell, very interactive. So we will be asking you questions throughout the session, but you can also ask us questions. And wherever you're watching, if you're watching on Risk Awareness Week website, you can ask questions, and there'll be some polls and voting for you there. If you're watching on YouTube, you can ask questions there. If you're watching on LinkedIn, you can ask questions there as well. So very exciting. I want to hand over to Alex to kind of get us moving into the actual content of the presentation. I think enough of the admin stuff from me. Keep it interactive. By the way, if you are watching, well, actually, if you're watching on any social media or on Risk Awareness Week, share this page on your social media so more people participate and more people see this, because the quality of the content or the messages and the examples we're going to share is pretty groundbreaking for the risk profession. So I think you'd regret not to use this information. So Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Alex, and yeah, just really thank you for the opportunity to be able to present to this audience, and very excited about this presentation. And also just been really, really insightful to have been in communication with you over the past weeks. It's, yeah, really, really happy about this connection that we were able to make over LinkedIn. So speaking of LinkedIn, if you guys want to connect, here's my LinkedIn here, and that's the QR code for my LinkedIn page. My name is Alex Glebov. I'm CTO at AI Powered, and I want to get started by kind of outlining what I'm hoping to deliver to you today. So I want to get through understanding where is AI today, and what are we talking about when we're saying LLM and AI? What are some of the limitations? What do we have to look forward to? There's a lot of conversation about AGI, superintelligence, and so on. So I'm here to kind of give you some of those perspectives that are out there. What are some of the practical adoption steps that you can take for your organization, especially in anticipation of what's to come? And we're going to do a little bit of a technical deep dive, because I do think it's important to start going through some of the concepts with more detail and kind of removing some of the mysticism and understanding what those are. And of course, I'd like to wrap up with safety and privacy, and how to, if you are looking to integrate AI, how to do that with how to use some of the safety and privacy principles that a lot of organizations have already been using, but what are some of the best practices? So I'm very excited about this presentation. I'm hoping this to be kind of like the best AI presentation you're going to hear. So, and there's going to be some points of interaction. So hopefully within this, which will be under an hour, like maybe 35 to 45 minutes, we're going to be able to get through all this, and you're going to walk away having gained new knowledge, having gained new skills, and most importantly, the confidence to be able to go through some of these subjects and introduce it potentially into your workflow in the most useful way possible. So, okay, so what are large language models like ChatGPT? Basically, there's sort of like there's different terms for how people describe these models. Broadly speaking, they call it like generative AI. And so a large language model, it's trained on text data, and its job is to produce a text output. And what it essentially is trying to do is it's trying to predict the most likely response based on the initial query. So user prompt. It's essentially trying to do its best to please you. And this journey with LLMs is relatively recent. There's been, of course, AI and machine learning goes back for tens of years. But one of the big breakthroughs, and this is really where the journey started for me when I first took notice of this, is back in 2017, when there was a paper release called "Attention is All You Need," and the simplicity and the efficiency of this new transformer architecture, which really is underneath ChatGPT, and this breakthrough really kind of facilitated this further. Really lowered the cost, made it a lot more efficient, and it made these LLM models go from something that looks not very impressive to something that has a lot of promise. And really, when you throw text data at these language models, one of the big barriers, of course, was cost. And so this new transformer architecture really allowed for much faster training. In this case, they did it on just 8 GPUs. GPUs are just basically graphics cards, for lack of a better word. But that's where that training occurred, and that really sort of sparked what much of us and all the what much of us are pretty much know about this industry. So it's really relatively new. Fast forward to November 2022, ChatGPT gets released. And what's remarkable about the release of ChatGPT is that you can see here the user adoption rate of other applications and how long it took them to get to 100 million users. And what's remarkable about ChatGPT is that it was able to achieve that 100 million users in just 2 months, which is faster than TikTok, faster than Instagram. I mean, it is just by far the fastest adoption rate. And what's remarkable is that it still gets, there's so much competition out there, but it still gets 600 million visits per month, according to SimilarWeb. And again, it just 5 days, it already surpassed 1 million users. So it kind of blew the lid off. And there was a lot of discussion and conversation. And for me, it really solidified that this is definitely an industry that I want to be in. So right around this time is when I started doing consulting services for integrating AI into workflows. So I'm just going to throw some questions in here that you could respond in the chat. I think I might be able to see the chat, or if not, Alex will tell me what some of the responses are. But these are kind of questions for you to think through and answer and share with other participants. So, I'm assuming, have you used ChatGPT in your work? And what are some of the use cases? We're really curious in knowing how other people use ChatGPT and other LLMs. If you're using a different model, please share that in the chat. Okay, so while you're doing this, I'll just kind of go through some of the other statistics that I just found were remarkable. So there's a lot of users. I think this is as of July. So the majority of the users are from United States, but there's a huge adoption going on in India, Brazil, interestingly in Kenya, as well as Mexico. And obviously the age distribution here is tends to be on the younger side, but I do think, and it looks like there's a lot of students using it, but I think what's incredible is that these technologies are just so accessible for people to use, and I'm bumping into people from all over the world that are actively using them. So I kind of want to go through, because when ChatGPT came out, and firstly, when I first started using it, my initial response actually was like, wow, there's a lot of hype over this technology, but this response is not particularly insightful. And this is, I think, when GPT-3 first initially came out. But I do want to go over some of what's really a remarkable achievement already. And this is data from Llama 3. It's very similar to Llama 3.1, which was recently received because it's kind of the next iteration of Llama 3. But if a human spent every day of their life reading at 250 words per minute for 8 hours per day without interruption for 80 years, they would read only 0.03% of the LLM training data of Llama 3. So Llama 3 here is roughly 15 trillion tokens. That translates to, again, we don't know exactly, but roughly 70 terabytes of data, or like 12 trillion words. These are all kind of estimates, rough estimates. And so it would take a single human 3,000 human lifetimes just to catch up to the amount of data that's already in the training set for something like Llama 3, which is completely open sourced and is available for people to use. And so the achievement, in some ways, it's already superhuman in that sense of be able to retrieve data that it's been trained on. And considering that Llama 3, let's just say, took it's like $2 billion to train, and this technology is available and open sourced and available for anybody to use, essentially free of charge if they can host this model. It's actually just incredible that we're living through this sort of opportunity that, in my experience, I've just never seen before. So that being said, there's obviously a lot of hype about LLM. So I do want to kind of balance this out with what are some of the limitations that are important to keep note as we kind of all start to use these AI models more and more. One important limitation that's been in existence for a while is the input token limit. And this is something that used to be much worse. Now it's gotten to, I believe ChatGPT is around 128,000 tokens. So you can definitely be loading, tens and tens of pages of data into it, just even part of like a single response. But still, the more data you load it, you give it with like a single prompt, it sort of you're not necessarily guaranteed to produce better results. And so there is still this input token limit that there are, really interesting solutions that have emerged to deal with. So that's something to be aware of, is that you can't just give it like an entire textbook of data and expect it to produce a useful and insightful response. Another limit is the response token limit. So this is actually probably one of the most impactful limits that I personally deal with on a daily basis as part of my consulting work, is that, for example, with OpenAI, the token limit is roughly 4,000 tokens. So it's really like a few paragraphs of response, or let's say if it's code, it's maybe, I don't know, 150 lines of code or something like that, depending on obviously the length of the lines. And so this sort of response limit that you have to kind of get around as you're starting to incorporate it into your business and into your workflow it's important to be aware of, because if you ask ChatGPT to write a book, it will sort of have a limit in terms of what its output is. And now, interestingly enough, I do anticipate that ChatGPT 5 will increase both these limits substantially. And we've already seen that in Llama 3.1, 70 billion parameter model, that this limit has increased to roughly 35,000 tokens. So these tokens, they translate into how many characters you can roughly put in. Each model has a different way of how they calculate it, but the bottom line is that there's just so much data you could expect these models to output. And I think I just did a brief test when Llama 3.1 came out the other week, and I was able to produce a 50-page document, which roughly used about 25,000 tokens. Now, is the response perfect? No, it has kind of similar issues. When you give it too much data, you may not necessarily get a good response. The same thing when you ask it to produce a response that's really long, it may not be the best response. So these are some of the limits to be aware of. Now, the other thing is that these models do hallucinate, and you'll notice, if you're using ChatGPT, it will say like ChatGPT can make mistakes, so check important info. Gemini is good enough to allow you to kind of have a double checking feature that they've implemented in their online chatbot. And so there are other tools out there that have tried to address this issues in terms of not only checking the quality of the data, but also augmenting the response, your initial response, in order to give you contextual data that's really good. And we're going to get into some of these strategies for your business adoption further. Obviously, I've also seen, and I'm sure many of you seen, inconsistency with some of the responses, and this has to do with what's called a temperature parameter. So it's meant to, if you give it the same query over and over again, it's meant to produce different results. And so if you're applying that onto a large database, obviously, and if you're looking for a particular kind of response, for some percentage of these responses, you may not get what you're looking for. And so there are strategies that deal with this issue. These LLMs, a lot of people think, there's a lot of speculation at the beginning that, are these LLMs thinking? Are they reasoning? Are they conscious? And I would say that they're not really reasoning, and so they're able to retrieve the trained data in this really impressive predictive fashion, and they're able to kind of speak as if you're speaking to another human being. In that sense, I would say it passes the Turing test, but I wouldn't describe that as true reasoning, and so this is a limitation that AI engineers are aware of, and there are different strategies for how to deal with this going forward. There's also, of course, the training cutoff, and some of you may see the response and say, well, this is kind of outdated, or maybe the quality of response isn't as deep enough. I know Alex certainly mentioned this to me on a number of times. And so these models, they have a training data set, and it's important to know what's the cutoff period, so that if something happened after this cutoff period, it's likely not included in the training data set. And the other limitation is, I would say, cost. And it may not be a huge issue if you're a small organization, or if you're a large organization, but you have a use case that's not very big. But if you are looking to if you have a database of like millions of users, and you wanted to do hundreds of queries, very quickly those token costs can add up substantially. Now, obviously, with ChatGPT, you're getting a lot of value for $20, and others like Anthropic and Gemini, their costs are either free or very little. And certainly 3.1 is Llama 3.1 is actually free. So I would say we're getting a lot of value for money, but if you do start to apply it at scale, you are going to run into some of these cost issues that for which there are also strategies to deal with. So I've outlined some. Now I know others have experienced other limitations. This is not meant to be a conclusive list. So if you have some of those limitations that you found while using LLMs, please throw those into the chat, because it's good to share some of those. Okay. So there's been a wave of new LLMs since the release of OpenAI's model. And this is kind of like my personal use ranking of LLMs that I use based on my daily work. I typically have Cloud 3.5 Sonnet, especially to assist with coding, and as well as their chat bot function is really good. And I also use it a lot for client work. So we do queries now a lot with Anthropic's new Cloud 3.5 Sonnet. And part of the reason is the context window is so large, and I found that the quality of the responses have actually been sometimes better than GPT-4. For the longest time, it's been GPT-4, and now kind of a cheaper model, GPT-4o, and a very, very affordable model, GPT-4o Mini. And these are great for things like AI vision. GPT-4, I would say, is still very incredibly good model. So there's no reason to move away unless you have a particular use case. But it is starting to get sort of, it's a crowded field now than it used to be before, where GPT-4 really was the only game in town. There's other models like Microsoft's Phi 3 that I've also been experimenting with, but it just didn't quite make the list for this presentation, but deserves an honorable mention. And most recently, I've just been having a blast with Llama 3.1. Their 70 billion and their 4 or 5 billion parameter model has been really interesting and really useful. And so I'm starting to switch over to doing this more and more. And then Gemma, I also have a Gemma 2 or Gemini chat open, and this is a model that we sometimes use as well. So but this is kind of like my personal preference. Now, each of you guys will have your own personal preferences and different use cases. So this is by far not meant to be an overall ranking. These rankings, depending on how you grade them, they do change. So, but what's important to know is that I think we're in this unique timeline, and this is August 2024, before GPT-5 has come out, before some of the other models that are going to be released have come out, and we're in this really interesting time period where you have these closed source models. That's your ChatGPT, your Gemma 2, your Sonnet 3.5, and you have this open source model, Llama 3.1, and the performance is really starting to look like we're very close to the same levels. And this has not really happened before. And so what that allows, the sort of opportunities in the kind of business implementation, the kind of innovation that companies are able to do, the sort of products that are able to build, I think are really interesting. And this really just happened quite recently. So those are some of the models. Now, very briefly, and I think these slides are going to be available for you to download, so you don't need to worry about making notes and stuff like that. But I just wanted to give you a sense, like in 2003, there were many AI products and services that have emerged that have sort of been around, but really have gotten a huge boost with the adoption of ChatGPT. And then, 2024, it's just gotten even more. At this point, I personally don't even. It's hard for me to keep track, and I do this every single day. So I can only imagine what it's like for somebody to keep track of all the products and services that are out there. So it's just an incredibly growing industry, and really every week, like this presentation will probably be out of date next week already, because there'll be some new thing that'll come out. So it's an incredible journey to be a part of. So some of the questions that I just want to throw out there is, what AI services and products do you use? Maybe it's personal, or maybe it's part of your company. And I'm just also curious, like, which AI models do you use the most? I mentioned some of my preferences, but I'm curious what the participants in the audience here uses the most. So I'll give you a moment to answer that in the chat. And then let's jump, as you're doing that, I'll just talk about the next slide here. So where we are is already quite impressive. And to be honest with you, most people, I think, are surprised at how, there's two sides. There's people who are, that I speak to, that are really not that impressed with where these LLMs are today. And I understand, and the limitations are real. But there's also a lot of people who are just surprised at how good these LLMs are in the first place, and the fact that they work as well as they do. And one thing the way I think about what's coming next is by kind of following the money. So currently, if you look at the GPU clusters investments, so to host a model, you don't need a huge GPU cluster. A single model can be hosted. If it's quantized, it can even be hosted on like a MacBook Pro. If it's kind of reduced in size, because essentially a large text file. So what you need is some RAM, on your GPU or your CPU. But to train these models, you really do need quite a large GPU cluster. So if you look at some of the investments, 2024, we've basically, with the Meta has released what their clusters look like, and I think they're using something like 45,000 GPUs, kind of all connected together, training. And they're using it's about 15 trillion tokens of data. So roughly speaking, if you add up all those costs plus the electricity that was used, plus roughly the maintenance cost, we're looking at somewhere like the existing models that you're using have all cost roughly between $100 to $2 billion, and with Llama 3.1, it's probably closer to 2 billion, or maybe now beyond that. And same thing with OpenAI. I'm sure the costs are potentially even greater. So that's where each company is kind of in the $1 to $2 to $3 billion range in terms of the amount of GPU compute, of raw compute power that they're kind of throwing at these LLMs and all the data they're throwing at. Now, depending on how you track quality data, so there's a certain amount of data that's out there that can be used to train these LLMs. So they're not trained on the entire internet at this point. They are trained on some percentage of that data. And really, the data that's non-repetitive, data that's kind of unique, humanity as overall hasn't actually, depending on how you measure what's quality text data, this percentage isn't, the amount of data in terabytes volume isn't necessarily that big, right? So it is possible for these LLMs at some point within the next couple of years to essentially run out of data that they can, that's like it's considered quality data. Now, obviously, we produce a lot of data, produce like zettabytes of data every week, but in terms of the quality text data, there is kind of a limitation. And again, it's a topic of debate. Some people say there's actually way more data. Other people say no, there's actually a lot less. But we do know that there is going to be way more data that's going to be contributed. Now, one important data point is that the conversations we're having now with these LLMs, unless your privacy is turned on, or unless you've turned off the sharing feature, there's I think at ChatGPT there's a feature where you can disable where you don't want to share your conversations to improve these models. That these conversations are being used potentially without your personal data, but potentially are being used, depending on their quality, to generate additional data that will augment the training data for the next GPT model. So it may be that the idea of how many terabytes or how much available data will greatly expand. And of course, there is also the synthetic data. So this is data that's created by AI. So that could also expand. And there's also, all kinds of different data that's been sort of sequestered and not publicly accessible that can be included as well. So I think we're going to have a lot more data being thrown at these LLM models, and that tends to make them better. And then the amount of compute that's being thrown is substantial. There is sort of already, 10 to 100 billion dollars of GPU clusters being built. I mean, just Microsoft alone has, I think, committed to build a $100 billion cluster. And so you can kind of speculate and think through, but is it feasible that we're going to get to $1 trillion being spent by Tesla, Microsoft, through OpenAI, Google, AWS, and Google with Anthropic, and AWS? I mean, Cohere. Is it possible that collectively, and then there's obviously different countries that are adopting, are we going to be spending over $1 trillion on GPU compute per year? I think that's probably very likely, although of course, we can't know what the future holds, but it certainly is possible. So you're seeing a lot of headlines, Microsoft AI, $100 billion data center. There's, almost every month you're seeing some announcement about, Mark Zuckerberg obviously is spending a lot on NVIDIA chips. There's AWS, and these chips are getting better and better. So there's a lot of just raw dollars that are being thrown at the overall compute. And so that leads me to conclude that these models, if a model was trained on $1 billion, if it's a $1 billion cluster, and now it's a $100 billion cluster, obviously it matters. There are other columns you have to get right for these LLMs to get better, but it's clear that it's going to be not only better, but like just a multiple of what we currently are today. So yeah, the other part that I want to mention is we are producing, as humans, we are producing a lot of data. So you have a gigabyte, a terabyte, petabyte, exabyte, and then you have zettabyte. So we're producing half a zettabyte of data each day. So really, with these LLMs growing larger and larger in terms of their ability to compute, and really humanity outputting more and more data, zettabytes of data, really it's a question mark of like, where is the ceiling overall? I mean, obviously there's a quality and non-repetitive and other types of filters that you can apply, but I think the amount of data that, while we may run out at some point, I think is actually not necessarily, we're not necessarily going to run out of certainly the interactive data between users and these LLMs and the synthetic data that these LLMs will produce. So market response has been, NVIDIA has gone up quite a bit, I don't know today what the latest stock price is, but it's somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion market cap. There's a guy named Leopold who published a paper called Situational Awareness. It's like a long essay, and that made the rounds among the AI industry. And one of the things that he speculated about was like, okay, well, if GPT-2 was something like a preschooler, GPT-3 is an elementary schooler, GPT-4 something like a smart high schooler, and he used to work at OpenAI, so he's kind of looking at it from the GPT perspective. GPT-5 could be something like a smart, university student, and then GPT-6 could be like a smart employee of a company. And so at some point, if AI research becomes automated, there is a point at which, and I don't know, it might be an iterative kind of continuous approach. I don't think it's going to be like a single point, a singularity as people describe it. I think it's just going to be kind of an iterative approach. We will interact with something that feels more and more like a superintelligence. And I think, some people have a big debate around, are we going to get to artificial general intelligence? And they make good arguments for why we're not going to get there. But I think these questions kind of become more semantic. In terms of my daily use and your daily use, are we going to get to a point, sometime between now and 2030, where we're interacting with an AI that feels pretty close to superintelligence or feels like superintelligence? And I think the answer is likely yes. Given the current progression and given the amount of dollars that are being thrown at the compute and the amount of data that will be added and the improvements in AI reasoning and some of the other technologies that I'm going to go through, some of the other tools. So I think the answer is yes, and it kind of becomes a question of how fast or how slow. But those differences and disagreements amongst the AI industry are, depending on which side you take, really just a question of like years, in terms of how soon are we going to get to something that feels for a lot of humans as superintelligence. So it's very exciting stuff to be alive while it's going on. Some call it the AI era. I like Max Tegmark. I like his quote: "No one can stop the progress of artificial intelligence. It will inevitably be a central force in our future." He's one of my favorite physicists. And so as we think about AI, there's lots of different terms thrown at you, like generative AI, machine learning, deep learning, all of these different approaches. But really, what can it actually do, right? So you're familiar with a text. You've probably seen some images and videos. Those are going to keep getting better. There's this element of AI vision where it can, see kind of and interpret what's on the image. It's going to be able to interact with your database, and it's already doing so in many for many companies. It could be a great transcriber, so it can listen to your voice, it can speak to you, and it can code. And this is, I think, in terms of work, like there's a lot of different, I guess, skill sets like empathy and emotional intelligence and other things that, it's not going to be as good as the humans, but in terms of like data retrieval tasks, I think it's going to be something that all of us are going to have to figure out how to use and incorporate, and it's a very exciting thing to be doing in my perspective. So I've got some questions for you as you kind of reflect on what I've shared, and some of you may already know about these concepts and the data. And I know I've got a lot of risk managers in the audience. So my question to you is, how do you think AI will reshape the concept of risk itself in your company? And perhaps, and this is something that I'd also be curious about, is like, what aspect of risk management do you wish could be automated by AI? And so the first question here, I think, is a no-brainer, but I mean, if you, but I'm curious to hear the answers to these questions. Okay, so as you're kind of thinking that through and putting that in the chat, I want to move on to the next slide. And this now gets into, we've now gone through some of the understandings of where AI today is, some of the limitations, the looking ahead. And you're going to say, Alex, this is all great, but like, how do I practically adopt AI into my business and into my workflow? And so I'm going to go through some of the concepts that I think all of us need to be familiar with as we sort of start to dabble, or if you've already gone into this industry, how you want to kind of progress your way through. I'm going to go through each of these concepts with the exception of fine-tuning and training. But first thing to note is the API. So these models, you're interacting obviously with the chat screen, but you can also do an API call, an API request that will generate a prompt, and you can receive a prompt. And I'll go through what a simple example of an API call looks like. And that's really like a lot of people's sort of second or third way how they're adopting after they've already began using ChatGPT or Gemini or Anthropic's chatbot, or maybe another chatbot. There is prompt engineering. So I'll introduce some kind of examples of prompt engineering techniques that I've been using for clients and other people have been using. There's a whole profession now has emerged called prompt engineer. And so it's been fascinating to follow that and where that's gone. And a lot of the prompt engineering, I feel like, gets kind of rediscovered because we're constantly discovering what these LLMs are capable of doing, especially with each new model. The capabilities keep expanding. So sometimes, you're not sure if it can do a certain thing, and then a couple of months later, oh, actually, it can do that already. I'm going to go through RAG. This is Retrieval Augmented Generation. So this is kind of like most people's third step of how they start to introduce private data and augmenting these responses, and kind of go through an example of what that looks like. And another one is called function calling, and this is something that gets used a lot by different products, but it's certainly used frequently in different ways to automate different operations of your business, including risk management. And actually, both of these are used widely. And for the retrieval augmented generation, some people are using GPT assistants, that they're creating these assistants that you can create and loading in a bunch of data, and then you have a chatbot. So I think that augments its response based on this data set that's been loaded in. And I think that's a really popular and easy way to start to begin to customize how these GPTs are returning responses that are going to be substantially better than if you didn't do that, if you didn't augment it with this additional data. And so that's a great way to get going as well on this. And then I'm going to get into some of the more advanced stuff, like multi-agent, kind of introduce the concept briefly. What does it mean? And then the other step of fine-tuning, this is when you're sort of adding additional training data to your LLM. Let's say you've downloaded Llama 3.1 and you want to fine-tune it further for your unique use case. This is something that does happen, but is not something I normally work on. It just doesn't. Some of the results have been not necessarily as good as if you use the retrieval augmented generation, the RAG approach. And so for that reason, this is actually becoming kind of less and less popular and less and less used. Although there are certainly some use cases where this is still applicable. And then training is really just when you're training a model from scratch. This is what Google is doing. This is what Microsoft and OpenAI and all of these companies, and Meta, and they're deploying these giant GPU clusters, and they're training these models on this large data set. So these are some of the terminology that you need to be aware of as you're sort of maneuvering through the landscape of AI adoption. And so I'll start with just the first example. What does an API actually look like? I feel like there's a lot of mysticism sometimes in these conversations about what it actually means. So you have let's say on your this is kind of similar to ChatGPT as well, or maybe you have your company has a different chatbot, or maybe they have a database they want to interact with. Essentially, there's some kind of user input. Let's say in this case, this is a chat interface. You process the user input, and then you simply send a request to the LLM, and you can select different models. In this case, in this example, let's just say it's an OpenAI model, GPT-4 Turbo. And so that when you send it to a particular URL with your API key and this request and the way that they want you to format it, you get an API response. And this is the response from the LLM. Then you process the API response, and then you display that to the user. So essentially what you're seeing is you made an input and you did an output, but this is sort of, a very simple example of what can happen in the background if you wanted to create your own personal chatbot for your company or so forth. And there's, of course, a lot of ways you can make this, you can improve upon this simple model and kind of complicate, and depending on your use case, really make significant gains and improve what you're able to do above and beyond what you can do with ChatGPT if you're just interacting with the LLM online. So next is, I just want to discuss briefly, and again, this is not an exhaustive kind of approach. There's all kinds of prompt engineering courses you can take to start to understand and the goal is, you've got this LLM, you can give it a prompt, and the prompt the response, the challenge that you have is that sometimes the response isn't what you want or what you expect. And so you kind of have to go back and forth. And that is actually a very useful exercise if you're doing it in ChatGPT. But if you have let's say a large database and you want to do a single query, a single LLM query on a row of data, and there's different ways how you can kind of begin to prompt engineer prompt engineering of how you can prompt engineer an LLM response based on your data set. So you can of course have a single parameter prompt. You can have a dual parameter prompt, so you have some user instructions, and then you have a data point that's dynamic. So it's just going through every row of data, and it's in your request to the LLM, you're including a different set of data points every time you hit that API. And then you can do a multi-parameter with some static text. So this is just kind of one simple example. There's lots of other different ways how you can kind of think about prompt engineering and structure different responses. And there's, guides online about different types of instructions that produce different types of responses. But really, I think the best way I think about prompt engineering is you experiment, and then you see what the response is. And then if it's sort of getting there, then you're on the right track, and maybe you want to replicate that across your data set. A lot of prompt engineering is you come with an intuition based on your experience and based on some of the evaluations you've done, but you ultimately won't know until you try it multiple times, and then you can start to compare the results over the entire data set to see if it met your evaluations criteria. So that's why I think prompt engineering, I think, is an important job for every company out there going forward. Is how do you get the most out of your AI integration just by simply changing the prompt or changing how dynamic the prompt is. So next I want to get into RAG. So RAG is something that there's lots of videos online, and I'm hoping that this is kind of a simple way to explain RAG. But you let me know in the feedback. So essentially a user has an input, and let's say in this chat interface, and this is like a chatbot you have, let's say that you've built yourself for your company. This user input is some kind of text is then converted into what's called an embedding. Okay, and I'm not going to get too technical on you, but bottom line is it's being used to query a knowledge database. So let's say you have some knowledge base or a database, or it could be a giant PDF, or it could be anything. You divide that up into different data chunks, and you create what's called a vector database. And so what you're doing in a RAG example is you're trying to solve the problem of, like, let's say I have an entire book that I want to throw at an LLM, and I have a very particular question that has to do with like a certain concept in chapter 3. Well, instead of giving the LLM the entire book, why don't we just find the chunk of data that is close enough to the meaning of your question, or maybe the top 3 or the top 5 chunks of data from that book that will get close to the question that the meaning of the question that you're asking, and we throw that into. So this is where they retrieve the relevant chunks, and then we throw that into the user query, right? And then we send this augmented request. This is the word augment comes from, to the LLM through an API. So you've just queried the data, you've given it these additional text chunks. It could be top 3 or top 5 or just one or whatever. And then the AI generates a response based on what it knows, but also based on this data set that's just been retrieved and augmented as part of its instructions. And so depending on how you set up these instructions, you're going to get vastly different responses. And so there's different ways you can evaluate how this whole system works. But the bottom line is that you're augmenting this response with some data that the LLM likely doesn't already know. And then eventually gets displayed to the user. So again, you're only seeing these 2 things, but RAG is this entire process, actually multiple API calls going on here. Okay, so that's RAG in a nutshell. And by far what I do for most organizations, and really for a lot of, like, if we're going to do AI risk management, and would be focused predominantly on either prompt engineering or creating a RAG approach. So next is a function calling. This is starting to get a little bit more complicated, I recognize. But what I want to say here is that basically it looks very similar to the previous approach, except instead of doing a request instead of trying to query the database, the vector database, there's a function that gets executed. And I think sometimes when people say like AI is performing a function, an example would be like to an external API to, I don't know, retrieve the weather or something. What's actually happening is the AI identifies the need for a function call based on your user input, based on your initial prompt, but the function call is actually being performed by the function handler, right? In this case, we just call it a handler, for lack of a better word, because it actually executes the function. And the LLM can dynamically, based on the options, figure out what sort of parameters it wants to include in the function call. And I think that's very useful. But it's not actually the AI that's doing the function. You have to program a function handler to execute different functions. And so those functions can be predetermined and can be limited in certain use cases. And all of a sudden you have a very powerful automation tool. But what's important is that this really requires a lot of engineering, not a lot of engineering, but it requires quite a bit of engineering, just setting it up and testing it correctly. And then for the rest of it, it returns the function results, sends it to the LLM API plus the function results, and then you get a display response to the user. So when people say, what's AI function calling? You can now tell them, okay, this is what it's actually doing. It's you predefine certain functions. And with ChatGPT, actually, very interestingly enough, as a quick tip, you can, next time you're interacting with it, you can ask it to use Python, generate Python code, for example, to output a certain text as a PDF, let's say. And it will do that. And it will do that effectively through a code executioner that they've built in that can write code, execute it, and output a PDF. And so it's performing a real function. And you can create all kinds of different functions with external API calls, or maybe it's your business, it's something within your company, and so on and so forth. Okay, I'm starting to run out of time here, but I'll just briefly touch base on multi-agents. And the thing to know here, I think the word multi-agent can be sometimes helpful, but also a little bit misleading, perhaps. So this is an example by AutoGen, which is an open source multi-agent framework created by Microsoft. But really what's happening is that these are all just individual API calls that are doing it in this automated way. And it could be even the same LLM, right? But a different system message most likely, and a different prompt, and it's including the response of a prior AI model in its next response. And so in this example, you have an assistant agent, you have a human in the loop. There are examples where there's no human in the loop, and there's this kind of automated flow. Anyway, we can get into some of the there's really interesting work that's being done in the multi-agent LLM examples, and there's some of them are applicable, in fact, for risk managers if you want to try to simulate different people and different roles within your company, and how would an LLM approach, and if you had a conversation between 2, 3, or more LLMs. And I think those are really fascinating. But I think what the key takeaway is that it's a kind of it's a framework that's being used, but at the end of the day, what you're really doing a lot of the times is whether or not you're using these frameworks, and they're called multi-agents, at the end of the day, you're still kind of goes back to my initial API example, which is, you're doing this loop, right? And you're sending an API request, and ultimately every agent call is a request to an LLM. And part of that request may include prior conversational history. It may include additional instructions. Different instructions occur different ways, and you may experience them as if it's multiple LLMs, or maybe multiple agents talking, or multiple AIs talking. But underneath it all, you're essentially dealing with this API call, but it's just in a kind of a more creative, complex way. And certainly, the examples and some of the businesses that have emerged that are using multi-agent frameworks are really, really impressive. And it's really going back to this question of dealing with a certain limitation that these LLMs have, which is reasoning, right? It's able to retrieve data very effectively in certain use cases, but how can we get these LLMs to reason? And so what you're seeing is different approaches to start to create new reasoning patterns of, like, if you think about even just your own brain, you probably have multiple agents, quote unquote, in there as a metaphor, and they have conflicting priorities, and they're kind of contributing in different ways to the conversation, and then you sort of emerge as a single answer after processing these multi-agents or multiple voices in your mind, or multiple priorities. And ultimately what you have is potentially a better response, and so a more reasoned response. And so this is some of the attempts that are being made to deal with that limitation. And there are other attempts that we can get into, but for now, I think I want to leave it there. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what are some of the key concepts as you begin to talk with developers or other people in the field in terms of what sort of technologies you're interested in adopting, and how you yourself are interested in kind of scaling your products or your workflows or risk management or whatever it may be. And I think it's not last but not least is I want to talk about some of the strategies for AI privacy and safety. So first things first, I think when you're integrating a certain AI, it's important to read what the privacy policy is for that AI model. Like, if you don't want your data to be used as part of the training data set, then there are options within pretty much all the companies for you to be able to select those options and purchase the plan, whether it's an enterprise plan or a different kind of plan that allows you to keep your data, your company data, private. Now that, of course, means that you are trusting that company to follow that policy and not create synthetic data or some other types of data on top of your data. But that is a very important practical step that I think most people need to do, is just review what is the AI policy and reach out to them and find out. You can set up this private retrieval augmented generation where you still got your database that's separate, but then you're only pulling in the relevant chunks, and that way you're limiting exposure. And then, of course, you can use a private AI model. This is something that I've been working on extensively for the last, I would say, probably around 12 months, is you can create a private AI cloud infrastructure where only your users have access to this server. And so when you're running these models, you've protected access. And so these models, they're just running within your secure environment. You can also, if you're worried about your data, you can create a synthetic. There's basically just data that's similar to your data, but is not actually your user data. So this is a strategy to test out and evaluate different RAG models on synthetic data before you actually begin to implement it and go through all of these other steps. And then, of course, you can block certain access to LM. They call it personally identifiable information. So if the API keys, people's names, SIM cards, or whatever data you have in your database, you can implement strategies to make sure that data doesn't get shared in the API call itself, so that by the time the data comes to the LLM and to whatever company external API you're using, that data is just not there. It's not part of the query. You got to do quality control. I think it's really important to have people that understand all of this and can really test it. And then, of course, it always just comes down to testing your system into implementation and evaluating it for performance. Because believe it or not, there's not one way to do RAG. There's not one way to do prompt engineering or just even a simple API call, depending on how you structure everything. And it really can produce drastically different results. And so evaluation is super key, and continuous evaluation. So that's pretty much it for me. One question that you may have, when to integrate AI. I always joke it's either too early or too late. Of course, it's hard to find exactly when the right time to do it for your business or for your workflow or for your company. But I think this is something that that is important to do sooner or later. And with that, in fact, actually, one of the projects that I'm working on is really simulating AI risk. And so we're we're constantly looking for volunteers and people to provide feedback and risk managers to provide feedback. So if you are interested in that, hit a plus in the chat, and or just like a plus sign, and so we can maybe reach out to you and see if we can work about how to actually build products for AI managers, AI risk managers, and how to automate and begin to start integrate some of these tools across the industry. So something I'm interested in as a personal project at this point. So with that, I'll leave my contact information. The easiest place to get a hold of me is on LinkedIn. So here's my QR code link to LinkedIn. You can also reach out through email if you've got some questions. Yeah, that's it for me. So Alex, oh, it looks like Alex is, I'm having a trouble hearing you, Alex.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Perfect. For some reason, I need to switch on and off the mic. Alex, thank you. Some amazing feedback and thank yous you're getting in the chat. And I actually made that poll mandatory for people. The last one, is it too early or too late? And you'd be interested to know that 60% think it's too early and 40% think it's too late. Which is obviously a joke because there's no right answer. But I think that was quite fun. So huge thanks. Quick question, technical question to you, Alex. Can you see the comments? Okay, on the one chat. Okay, I'll make sure all the comments make it to you while we give the floor to Brian, and then you can reflect on some of the questions, because there was a lot of comments, a lot of questions. Like really, your talk really kind of encouraged the discussion. I think people are quite fascinated by it, and we have a lot of pluses, which is great. By the way, Alex wasn't exaggerating. If you're interested, like if you're passionate about learning how to use AI for risk management, if you want to become a volunteer and participate in some of the testing, brainstorming, back and forth, ideas exchange, put a plus, and we'll add you to, I don't know, we'll create like a private WhatsApp group or something, and then we'll chat there. Okay, perfect. So, Brian, over to you. Do you want to start sharing your presentation so I can edit? In the meantime, take a picture of the contacts. But of course, the replay will be available both on the Risk Academy YouTube channel and on the Risk Awareness Week website. There'll be a new page called Replays, and this video recording will be available there. Plus, we'll make all the slides available after the webinar. So, Brian, over to you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Alex, and great presentation. Really interesting stuff. So my name is Brian McGew. This presentation is about building AI tools and risk management. And my goal in this presentation is to educate you a bit about how I personally am building tools in these spaces. And I'm also going to be demoing a proof of concept of a risk management AI tool. And I'm also going to lastly provide, I'm in hopes of providing some inspiration around how you can use AI to automate your own workflows. Great. So a little bit about me. I have been a software engineer for about 8 years now, working in a variety of different industries as a technical lead. And these days I'm building AI products in a variety of different industries, generally trying to automate workflows for professionals using AI tools in areas like physical design, text analysis for purposes of therapy, like behavioral therapy, video processing, working in real estate. It's really runs the gambit of industries, and I think it speaks to the promise and availability of AI solutions apply to all these different industries, and I believe that there's a lot of potential for AI to provide value in the risk management industry. So I'm really excited to be here today talking with you all about that. Jumping into it, an overview for an overview of tool building. So some areas that I find that AI can add particular value when it comes to these, augmenting professional workflows usually involve tasks with, specific workflows over searchable knowledge databases. And what does that mean? Let's start with an example, right? So supposing that you have like a specific task that you need to accomplish, and you want to, and the process that you go through by yourself. And again, I'm not a risk manager. I'm a software engineer. So, I think, a big part of this is trying to present different tools and options, and then work with you all to try to see how these can creatively be applied to your own day to day, right? So let's say you maybe need to you want to build a report for a client of yours, and you maybe the first step would be like finding relevant documents from a knowledge base, like let's say legal documents or financial requirements for a specific municipality, and then maybe after that, you would collect some information from different online sources, global news or stock market performance, and maybe you would take some different numbers and perform some math, like you'd maybe perform a Monte Carlo simulation, and then you would take all of these different pieces of information and condense them into a specific template, like let's say a spreadsheet or a report or a PDF or something along those lines. And maybe you need to update these regularly. Like you have to keep it updated on a quarterly basis, or you have some sort of meeting that you need to present it to. Each of these individual steps can be assigned to large language models and, measured and improved over time, and can be turned into a program that can actually execute these workflows quickly on a large scale. And that's what our goal is here. Going back to the slide, the first step in this tool building process is generally capturing the knowledge of professionals like yourselves through reading and understanding documentation, performing interviews. Alex and I have been working on this a lot recently. He's been sharing his expertise in risk management and providing me with different documents, telling me about different important tasks that he performs and how he performs them. And once we've identified workflows that we can't, we're able to automate, we break it down into these tasks, like I was mentioning a moment ago. Again, one example here is, let's say we have a database of proprietary documents, and we need to extract some specific information for one use case, right? What we would do is we would create a system that does that, like as Alex was mentioning a moment ago, like this is actually RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation in this case. So we would understand that for our specific use case, we would need to extract some specific documents. So, we would build this system and test that is actually working as expected. And then ultimately, we chain these multiple tasks together and ensure that they are working together well, and that the ultimate result is the outcome that is, compelling and valuable for the task that we're trying to accomplish. Great. So again, this might all sound a little bit abstract and a little bit, maybe difficult to follow. I hope not. But maybe to make this a little bit clearer, let's walk through an actual case study of a tool that Alex and I have been working on. This tool is essentially, its output the input. That's a really interesting or really helpful way, I think, to think about AI products is through inputs and outputs, right? So the input here for this tool is just some general information about a business, right? So it is the name of the business, the industry, the size, the location, existing controls and processes. And then the output would be a report that contains a list of risks for that business, The most important list of risks is what we're looking for, as well as a series of details for each of these risks. So we can break that workflow down into a series of steps, right? The first step is to create that list of risks. The second is to deep dive into each individual risk. And then lastly, we want to compile those findings into a report. And I've prepared a couple videos demonstrating how this tool works. Alex, are you able to share the video?
Walking through really quickly a live example of some of our agents having a conversation to generate a list of individual risks for a given company. So what we actually have here is, as you can see, we have a manager, a risk analyst, a challenger, and if you're not familiar with code, no big deal. Most of this is actually being printed out in a human readable format, which is very convenient if you're not an engineer. So what you can actually see here is we start off our crew of agents. We're using a tool called Crew AI here, which helps organize different agents and different tasks into teams that work together to produce a desired result. So you can see we have this manager agent, which is tasked with collecting as many operational risks for the business based on our Basel operational risk framework. And we're specifying that we want to do this for Retrieval payments, our industry, our location, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have some information about kind of what we want to focus on. So then we pass that task on to a different agent, which is tasked with generating a list of risks based on our previous prompt. And you can see that we're already starting to get some interesting risks here: anti-money laundering, inadequate customer due diligence procedures, non-compliance with GDPR regulations, monitoring of transactions, undetected suspicious activities. I've seen things around, terrorist organizations, money laundering, things along those lines, cybersecurity. So we're getting some interesting results here so far. And then we're going to pass that information on to our next agent, who's going to start to ask questions about these using techniques like the 5 whys, devil's advocate, things along those lines. And you can actually see it's interesting. It's a really cool tool. It's maybe encountering some issues and working to resolve that itself without actually needing any human input. So then we start to generate some different questions about these specific risks and to understand why maybe this is more relevant or less relevant to the specific business. And here, we could actually start to introduce additional agents, such as maybe an agent which has proprietary information about the business itself, or maybe can search on the internet to find information and maybe answer these questions without requiring any human input. But in the worst case scenario, we could actually present these questions to a human in order to, respond to these questions and determine whether or not they're relevant and ultimately compile the most compelling list of risks. And then the next thing that we're going to do is, actually generate a detailed deep dive for each risk, which I'll show shortly. Hi, everyone. Just walking through really quickly a lot.
Thanks so much, Alex. So I really do apologize for the quality of that video at the beginning, folks. It seems like there's something that it has to load or something along those lines. That's just for generating the list of risks itself. But again, in the whole process, there is the first step is to generate the actual list of risks. And then the second step is to do a deep dive into each of them and pull out a lot of different information, that would actually go into this risk assessment report. So, Alex, if you wouldn't mind sharing the second video. Let's hope that the quality is.
Right, so we have our list of risks generated now, and we're going to now show how we deep dive into each of these risks using chain of thought. Before we do that, I do want to preface that I'm not a risk manager, and maybe some of you might be seeing these different sections of a deep dive and saying that you would do things a little bit differently. But the point is that this is something that we can iterate on, and I love to call out if there's for the audience that are interested in developing tools like this or using AI to augment their workflows, and would love to chat and would love to have conversations about how this could be improved, or we could potentially create solutions specifically for your workflow. So you'll see some stuff getting printed out here on my screen. And what this is different sections for a risk assessment report that I have deemed appropriate, each being processed individually by a large language model. And for each of these sections, I've created a report that condenses relevant domain knowledge into a request and can use any of the different tools that we've talked about before: web crawling, access to financial data, risk management training documentation, things like that. And it can be specified and tweaked and improved upon and tested. And over time, we can continue to develop that into, to something that fits any matter of use cases. And as you can see here, for the cherry on top, once all of these sections have been generated, a separate piece of our program is going to format all of this information into a PDF document for use by humans. And of course, a PDF is just one kind of document output. We could format information into spreadsheets. We could create graphs. We could generate images, or we could even pass this into another LLM, into another system, into another software system. Even it doesn't necessarily have to be an LLM. So the potential is pretty significant. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. So yeah, that PDF there, we're actually, I think we're going to make maybe that available for sharing. We've done a little bit extra work on that and made it a little bit more presentable than showing the markdown there. But yeah, this is that's kind of just an overview of this tool itself, and to go into a little bit more about, or just to kind of reflect back on the possibilities of these of agents and the kinds of tools that we can implement in these specific in these workflows. Of course, there's obviously publicly available data, web crawling. There's a lot of different tools that exist that allow us to do a variety of different kinds of web searches and extract data from the publicly available internet, and make that useful for just like anybody does in their day-to-day. But then also there's a lot of opportunity for utilizing proprietary and secure data sources like internal documentation, meeting notes, client statuses, things along these lines. And on top of that, there's also a lot of really interesting potential use cases for like legal and financial research tools like LexisNexis, for example, or and there's also the ability to perform calculations, run simulations for this specific for specifically. It's definitely an important ability to have. And then there's also the, getting a little bit more creative, thinking of the ability to integrate with existing internal tools. Like supposing that you have a internal tool that your company use, and it requires, a certain interface, right? Like there's a certain way that you have to interact with it. Maybe there's a to think in non-technical terms, a program interface, an API, actually, as Alex was talking about before. That's actually something that we could condense information in a certain way, retrieve information from an internal tool, and then bring that information together to produce produce any given output, right? So, and speaking of outputs, yeah, there's all this information can be reasoned about and then formed into spreadsheets, into any imaginable number of document types, formats, or means of transmission. And of course, as Alex was talking about a moment ago, there's we working with sensitive proprietary data it's in these situations very important to be using private LLMs that are hosted in environments to ensure compliance and data privacy. And yeah, so I think a big goal of kind of what I'm trying to talk about here is to show the different possibilities and the different tools that are available, and encourage you all to get creative and say, how can I apply these different tools to my own workflows, and how can I customize my needs to my specific use case? And I think that's where this becomes extremely powerful, where AI becomes extremely powerful. And also, I would love to chat with you all individually, and feel free to reach out to me as well on LinkedIn to discuss these things. I'm always interested in figuring out how we can apply AI to use cases. And on for my last slide here, I will, or second to last slide, but I will just share something that I think is the most exciting part about working in AI as an engineer. It's that large language models, like when you're utilizing them in code, it's fairly easy to switch between different models, right? Like, if I wanted to build one program that does one thing and then have a second program that does something else, or maybe I want to upgrade this program that to using a more modern system or more modern tools. Generally, in the history of my career as a software engineer, that's been quite difficult. But with large language models, it's like one little piece of code that you just make this quick switch. And as Alex was talking a moment ago, there's so much investment and so much excitement in this space at the moment that what we're finding is we're building tools, and you're creating this infrastructure that around these models to utilize them in specific ways, and then but once you have this tool built with a specific model, and then another model comes out that is so much more powerful, it really suddenly just shoots up the potential of your own system and the accuracy and performance. So by investing in these things earlier on, and by understanding kind of the infrastructure, you're actually tapping into that ability to, or that trend of the overall industry to invest in language models and AI advancement. So I think it's fascinating, and I love to see a new model come out and plug it into my new systems, and you're like suddenly like, it's doing incredible things out of, and it really allows you to kind of level up anyway, I'm rambling. That's it. Thank you all so much. Again, would love to chat. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. My contact information is on the presentation screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Is my sound coming through? Okay, miracle, worked for the first time. Brian, Alex, huge thanks. So while people watching us start sending in through your questions, Alex, were you able to access the full chat?
Yeah, I've been reading through some of the chats, and the conversation has been really insightful. There's great feedbacks there for everybody to see. Thank you.
Okay, so let me wrap up and share some of a bit of my story on how I'm actually using this as work. So Risk Awareness Week is a hobby of mine, and during the day I am head of risk insurance and internal audit at the mining company, and right now I have created my own RAG, which I've trained on previous Risk Awareness Week workshops, some of the articles and videos that I've been recording over the last 10 years. And the reason I've done that is because ChatGPT or Gemini, if you ask it a general risk management methodology questions, 9 out of 10, it will give you a risk management 1, therefore incorrect answer. And you have to kind of really guide either through continuous prompting for it to get to the right answer. For example, from move to heat maps to decision science, you can do this in like dozen prompts along the way, or you can just pre-train a RAG model which says, okay, get all your answers from decision science and probability theory and neuroscience instead of risk management marketing brochures or standard risk management standards. So I have that, and my risk management team is using that for all the non-confidential general methodology support. We've also created a co-pilot, a corporate co-pilot, which uses kind of a separate but more internal database of knowledge. And we've now integrated it into Teams. So in Teams, we have this chat, just yet another chat that you talk to your Risk AI chatbot. And my team is beginning to test that to not only answer methodological questions, but also help with risk identification, mitigation strategies, different integrating decisions, checklists for different contracts, and so on. So that's the easy stuff. I think that is easily accessible to most of the people, and based on the comments you've provided, I can see that most of the participants have used or are beginning to use raw at AI anyway. So good for that. I'm glad it's useful for you. The more exciting thing, and this is what Alex, Brian, and I tried to do for this workshop, is Brian actually created a model where you give it minimum input about the context of the organization, and then it goes ahead and creates a risk and control self-assessment, like a full report with multiple risks, at the same time aligned with the operational risk taxonomy from Basel, and it actually kind of self-evaluates and improves on the quality. So the results are not your first response from ChatGPT, but kind of more in-depth analysis. And a separate agent then combines all of this information and exports it into a PDF. All done. I don't know, Brian, how long does it take to generate for a company?
About 5 minutes.
Yeah, so 5 minutes to generate a risk and control self-assessment or a detailed operational risk register. In the past, this would have taken us maybe weeks of organizing workshops, sitting down with people, trying to validate, updating, manual copy pasting from the previous risk report. So this alone is quite groundbreaking stuff. And this is, I think, just the beginning of what the potential out there is. The one thing that I'm hoping to make work for our company is I want to have a kind of a multi-agent model where different personas are trained for head of procurement, head of finance, head of HR, head of risk, head of legal, and then you put in the contract or an RFP into the model, and then it identifies all the different risks from all the different angles associated with that particular contract. I mean, that is something, again, that my team is doing every day, and having that automated is just mind-blowing because it's very quick. The quality is quite comparable to most kind of management level, junior and management level risk managers. And obviously you have to, I think that's where the complexity comes in. You have to really work on your design and the coding to make the quality of the output outstanding. But it's very feasible. It's within reach. I am already quite amazed by the quality of the answers that I get from my RAG. So that's I think we're very close there. Final reminder: if you're excited about this, if you want to see what we're developing, if you want to participate in some beta testing, if you want to provide some feedback or validation, or maybe you want to become a human validator for some of the model outputs. For example, it generates a list of risks, and at some stage we'll need a lot of risk managers to tell us if this list of risk is actually a decent one or it can be improved. If you want to participate in any capacity, please add a plus in either LinkedIn, YouTube, or on Risk Awareness Week where you're watching. I'll collate all of these pluses together, and we'll have a separate conversation. Any other questions? Alex, anything else? Brian, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I'm looking through the comments, and I'm going to spend some time reading through them. But I want to thank Michael Paik for a compliment that he gave to the talk, calling it a remarkably clear, cogent, and concise presentation with a lot of information in a short amount of time. So that comment made me feel very good. So I appreciate it. And then a lot of other great comments. So Alex, again, it's remarkable the opportunities I think that you're creating for engineers like ourselves, and the voice that you have is truly a leading voice in the risk management industry, and it's a privilege to be a part of the risk management workshops that you do, and the overall risk awareness week or year, whatever it is. But it's just really great. So I'm just immensely grateful to you, and thank you for the effort and the work that you've put into making this available to people for free, which is just wonderful and amazing. So thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, guys. And I think just to add to the excitement, Michael is watching from, what was it? I can't remember, Singapore or Hong Kong. So it's 2:30 a.m. for him. So that's true risk management dedication. I mean, this is just how excited people are about the content you guys are sharing. Thank you so much, everyone. And if you haven't registered for the Risk Awareness Week for the other 30 workshops that are going to happen end of August, in September, and majority of the workshops in October, sign up at 2024.riskawarenessweek.com, and we'll see you around. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Alex.
I'm still seeing the